Bava Kamma Daf Yomi BAVA Aleph, the value of gain is in the cost of loss. וסביביו נשערה מאוד. We're experiencing a time of enormous loss, losing wonderful young people every single day just about. Still reeling from the losses of October the 7th. The Jewish people are probably going through one of the most difficult times from a global perspective that we've gone through since the Second World War. And so we're dealing with loss a lot, and that's part of the subject of today's Gemara. For me personally, an additional loss that my brother-in-law of Michal Chill passed away yesterday. An enormous tzaddik, a person who without an institution behind him, just on his own, did such a vast amount of chesed to all sorts of people that most of even those who are close to him have no clue as to how much chesed he did, and he passed away yesterday. May his neshama have ilui. So we're working on a few psukim, two from Tehillim and one from Dvorim, that are very, very difficult, understanding them the way our Gemara understands them. וסביביו נשערה מאוד, the pasuk in Tehillim, that the Rebbeinu Shalom is particularly demanding with those who are closest to him. Tehillim Perek Peites, v'nora al kol sevivav, the Rebbeinu Shalom is full of awe for all those who are around him. End of the Torah in Parshas Ha'azinu, ki chol derachav mishpat, all of the ways of Hashem are mishpat, are ways of justice. There's a harshness in these psukim. And the Gemara that we're dealing with is an interesting Gemara. We started working on Bor yesterday, and we talked about the Bor that al iske kriyo pticho kriya huchayev, that the person is responsible because he did a destructive act. He dug a pit or he opened a pit. It's the action. It's not the pit. The pit doesn't belong to him. The pit isn't even an object. What is a pit? You take sand out of the hole. You leave behind the absence of an object. So a pit is not like a shore, it's not like an oxen, it's not like fire, but since he did something that was destructive, and he didn't protect society from his destructiveness, he left the destructiveness as it was, for that he's chayav, as we learned yesterday. However, the Gemara goes on to say there are times when bor is a good thing. Don't always think of bor as a bad, evil thing. Bor can also be good. Chafaru fatachu masal rabim patur. If you dug a pit and you handed it over to the local authorities to manage, that's a good thing. Then you're potter. You don't have any more responsibilities. We don't say, but you dug it. If somebody else then falls into the pit, we don't say, you are the person who initiated it, you started it off, you created the pit. No, it's now meant to be managed by the local authorities, and they are responsible. And that brings us to V'chein min hagor shel Nechunya chofer borot. We have the famous story of Nechunya, the digger of wells. So he used to dig pits along the route to Yerushalayim, so the oilei regalim wouldn't have to carry water with them. And the Yerushalmi says he knew exactly where there was cold water, where there was hot water, how hot the water was, and he created a whole system of water, a whole system to supply water to the Holchei Regalim on their route to Yerushalayim. And he would do that. He would build the pits and then hand it over to the government authorities to manage the pits and take care of them. And that's an example of a person who dug pits for a good reason. Then the Gemara tells us again the famous story where Maaseh bevito shel Nechunya chofer sechin shenafla bor gadol. There was a case where his daughter fell into a pit. Nechunya chofer sechin, this man who dedicated his life to building reservoirs along the way to Yerushalayim, his own daughter fell into such a pit. They came to Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa to ask him to daven. The first hour that since the event happened, he said, don't worry, she's alive, she's okay. The second hour, she said she's fine. The third hour, when she would no longer have been able to be alive, she couldn't have survived that long in the pit, he said, Altar, don't worry, she's already saved, she's out of the pit. And when they went to find her, they said, who took you out of the pit? He said, I found there was a shepherd was looking after his ram, and they took me out. They said to Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, Naviata? How did you know this? Are you a Navi? How could you tell? The first 2 hours she's still in the pit, but she's okay, and the third hour she's out of the pit. It's nothing to do with prophecy. He has dedicated his entire life to building pits. Is it possible his daughter's going to be killed in a pit? Doesn't make sense. And he's so sure. We talked about the power of rationality the other day, and how for a Jewish person, ideas are reality. For him, this is such a reality that it's not possible that Rabbi Nechunya Chofer, Boris's daughter, should be killed in a bor. However, Omer Rabbi Yacha, Afal Pikein, Meit Beno B'tzama. On the other hand, his son died of thirst. How do you explain that? If you're so sure that he was busy providing water for the Eilei Regolim, how could his son die of thirst? Shneimar וסביביו נשערה מאוד מלמד שהקדוש ברוך הוא מדקדק עם סביביו אפילו כחוט השערה. The Rebbeinu Shalom is meticulous with those who are close to him down to a hair's breadth of din. That if they do the slightest thing out of order, something which the Rebbeinu Shalom wouldn't have taken such notice of with an ordinary person, when a tzaddik does even these little things, the Rebbeinu Shalom hits back with a severe punishment. Rabbi Nechunya learns it from the second posuk, Rabbi Chanina from this third. Rabbi Chanina says, Kol ha'omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu vatranu yivatru chayav. Anybody who says, the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't mind, the Rebbeinu Shalom will forgive you, it's okay, don't worry. Yivatru chayav, he's giving away of his life. As Rashi says, because shemoreh el habriot lachato, you're allowing people to sin, you're encouraging people to sin, if you say everything will be okay. In the message, sometimes when we're trying to be mekarev people and we're trying to uplift people's spirits, rabbonim and mechanchim, Rabbi Shalom loves you, it's okay, he understands, don't worry, he's not going to hold everything against you, he's not a punishing God. Yeah, there are times when you want to make people feel better, but you've also got to be careful that what you're saying is true. Shenemar atzu tamim polo ki chol derachav mishpat. And Tosfos goes into what is the difference between the fact that Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa was so sure that his daughter couldn't have been killed in the pit, and yet his son was killed by thirst, and Tosfos deals with it based on the Yerushalmi and Shkolim and answers that. But we want to deal with today with the essence of the idea. And the essence of the idea is something that Reb Simcha Zissel's son, Simcha Zissel of Kelm, was the talmid of Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, and he started the Kelm Talmud Torah. And a lot of the great Baalei Musar of the following generations were from Reb Simcha Zissel and his son. His son was Reb Nochem Velvel, who then took over for the rest. He didn't live a lot longer than his father, but for that period he was the head of the Kelm Talmud Torah. And Rabbi Lapin learned there. And Rav Dessler, the Michtav Miliyahu, was a son-in-law of Reb Nochem Velvel. And he was there in the Kelm Talmud Torah. Our whole tradition of Musar comes through the Kelm Talmud Torah. And when Reb Nochem Velvel was young, was a child, he asked his father, this doesn't seem right, that the Rebbeinu Shalom should treat tzaddikim worse than everybody else. That's not fair. Why should they be treated worse than everybody else? And it's a bothersome question, and that his father writes a letter to him, which we have, and I've quoted part of it over here, writes to his son and reminds him of that question that he asked him when he was a young boy, and his father gave him an answer at the time. The answer that his father gave him, Rav Dessler quotes the answer, tells the answer of what he gave him at the time when he was a child, but now he gives him a different answer. When he was a child, he told him of a story that happened in Vilna, where there was a man who used to hand out tzedakah. He was the gabbai tzedakah, and a poor person came in and asked for tzedakah, and he gave him 70 kopecks of tzedakah. And the poor man said, you had a reputation of being a kind, generous person. How could you give me such a small amount? So the gabbai answered the poor man and said, if I was such a kind, generous person, you would have got nothing. And he said, why would I have got nothing? He said, because I would have given it all to the person who came before you. The fact that I measure it out carefully allows me to give you as well. Reb Simcha Zissel, in explaining to his young son, to Reb Nochem Velvel, said that you need din as well. It can't all just be rachamim, can't just all be mercy, mercy, mercy. You've also they've got to be limits, otherwise that becomes unfair. So mercy itself has to have its limitations, has to have its boundary lines. As we're seeing at the moment, the whole world is just full of mercy for the poor Palestinians. That's fine to have mercy for the poor Palestinians, but there have to be boundary lines. There's also got to be din, there's also got to be mishpat. You did something on October the 7th, that has to be dealt with, that has to be punished, we may need to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the result of that is that people suffer. Yes, that's like this poor man in Vilna suffered. He didn't get more than the 70 kopecks, but that's how the world is. You've got to balance these things off. But later on, Reb Simcha Zissel writes to his son a different one, and he writes based on what happened to Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moshe is just so great. There's never been a man as great as Moshe, and he's punished so severely for something so relatively minor. So much say, even at the end of the Torah, Hashem still says to him as if to shtech him a little bit more. Hereticha be'inecha v'shama lo tavor. I've shown you Eretz Yisrael, but you can't go to Eretz Yisrael. It makes it even worse for him. Why is the Rebbeinu Shalom punishing Moshe so much when Moshe is such a great man? And after all, says Reb Simcha Zissel, we learnt yesterday how the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't want animals to suffer. We learnt the Ibn Ezra yesterday that you know how to kill an animal for no reason. How much more so a human being, and how much more so a tzaddik, and how much more so an Isha Elokim. Hashem knows what chesed is, what it is to be merciful and kind. Why would you treat Moshe so cruelly, is what he asks. And he says this is based on our Gemara here in Bava Kamma. Kol ha'omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu vatran yevatru chayav. If you say that the Rebbeinu Shalom, he gives up, the Rebbeinu Shalom's kind, he's merciful, he won't take it seriously, you're giving up away some of your life. And he says, B'mei bachrutech b'ni, he writes to his son, when you were a child, hiksheita li mipnei ma eno mevater. You asked me, why does the Rebbeinu Shalom not mevater? And even more so, I bring the Gemara down at the bottom, we're going to tie this, I think we referred to it not too long ago, where Rabbi Eliezer davened for rain, and he said 24 brochas for rain, and he wasn't answered. Rabbi Akiva comes and he just stands in front and says, Avinu Malkeinu, ein lanu melech el ha'ata, Avinu Malkeinu mancha, rachem aleinu, v'yardu geshamim, and rain came down, the Gemara says in Tainis. And a bat kol came by and said, Lo mipnei shezeh gadol mizeh. That's not because Rabbi Akiva is greater than Rabbi Eliezer. Ela shezeh ma'avir al midotav, v'zeh eino ma'avir al midotav. It's because Rabbi Akiva forgoes. He forgives, and Rabbi Eliezer is a big captain. Rabbi Eliezer is very meticulous. He doesn't move off. He doesn't forgive easily. We've discussed that Gemara in and of itself, which is complicated. Why Rabbi Eliezer was that way, and he was a talmid of Beit Shammai, and so on and so forth. But we see from here that the Rebbeinu Shalom so values somebody who's ma'avir al midotav, somebody who's willing to be flexible and give up. Asks Reb Nochem Velvel, so why would it be that the Rebbeinu Shalom is so meticulous and won't give any kind of mercy to those who are closest to him? I've also had a problem with this. And then when you were a child, I answered it for you, and I gave you what his answer was. But now I've been thinking of this all my life, and now I've developed a better approach to your question, he tells his son. And what he tells his son is, the reason that Hashem created us in this world is so that we should own what we get in Olam Haba. And we've had this idea often. The Tzos HaChoshen talks about it in his Hakdoma, about how the essence of humanity is to be a creator, to be a generator, to be a contributor, not a taker, not a receiver, not somebody who's entitled. That's the essence of it, that we create what is ours. We create our business, we create our prosperity, we create our chidushei Torah, we create our ideas, and we create our own Olam Haba, so that when we come to Olam Haba, it's not something which is given to us and we have to take as a receiver. This is our own. We've worked on, we're the Bailim, we're the owners of this. Like we're talking about the Baal Habor, it's ours, it belongs to us. So the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted to make sure that everything we get in the Olam Haba is what we've earned. That's why we're in Olam Hazeh. Therefore, says Reb Simcha Zissel, if we were to say that the Rebbeinu Shalom forgoes, then what are we doing in this Olam Hazeh in the first place? Our souls were already much better off before we were born. Why were we brought here? The whole reason we were brought here is to develop our own greatness, to master our own character, and to become great in a way that we earn what it is that's waiting for us. So it's impossible for the Rebbeinu Shalom to let a tzaddik off lightly. A tzaddik so values the spiritual reward that is for him, not just in the world to come, but also in this world. The sense of accomplishment in developing greatness is so satisfying to a tzaddik that the Rebbeinu Shalom won't do him out of anything. Kitzar hefseid chelki minitzchi ein aroch v'dimyon letzar hayoter gadol be'olam hazeh. Because one small loss of a little bit of Olam Haba outweighs completely the cost of a little bit of suffering in this world. And so it's for his good. And mishpat itself is tzedakah. It's not that there's mishpat and tzedakah. I'll be speaking about it in a shir I'm giving the Shabbos and Shifteh after Shachris. The understanding how to work with these two elements of life, the element of mishpat and the element of tzedakah, of kindness and of toughness, of din and of chesed, how to work with these ideas and how important it is. And so Reb Simcha Zissel explains, if we understand deeply what it is that Reb Simcha Zissel is really saying, what Reb Simcha Zissel is saying is, we understand it in business, we just don't understand it when it gets to life. But it's a natural principle of the world, the way that Rebbeinu Shem created the world. And that is, if there's no cost to a loss, there is no value to the gain. If I were to say to you, you know what, invest $1 million in this business. If you lose it, I'll pay you back. There's no risk, there's no loss. You've got nothing to lose. Then you've got nothing to gain. And even the opportunity loss, I'll say, you know what, invest your $1 million in this business because you're going to make 10% a year out of it, for sure. And if you don't, I'll pay you the 10% a year. I'll make sure, I'll guarantee that you get your 10% a year. There's no value in something whose loss entails no cost. The two have to go together. There's only value in something which, if you lose it, is a problem. If you say to a child, you buy a child a beautiful present, a beautiful gift, and you say, don't worry, if you lose it, I'll get you another one. Don't get nervous. You lose it, I'll get you another one. You lose it in a late game, I'll get you another one. How much value does the child attach to that object? If you say to the child, I'm giving this to you, if you lose it, it's gone. It's the last opportunity. You're not getting another one. And the child loses it, and the child is suffering. The child says, please, Father, please, be kind to me. You're a kind father. Do you know how I'm suffering? This beautiful gift you gave me, and I've lost it. And the father has to be able to say, but that's what it is. It was valuable because its loss entailed a cost. If loss doesn't entail a cost, then gain doesn't entail a value. And so if we would say that Rebbeinu Shem is a vatron, the Rebbeinu Shem says you must do all these mitzvahs, but if you don't, it's also okay. You mustn't do all these averos, but if you do, it's also okay. Hashem will forgive you. Hashem's a loving God. That's Christianity. Then you do that as long as you accept it, you'll be forgiven, you'll be forgiven. Then there's no value to anything. There's only value to gain when there is cost to loss. And the more you value the gain, the more serious is the cost to the loss. And that's וסביביו נשערה מאוד. And that's why when the Rebbeinu Shem is working with those who are closest to him, those people understand the value of the gain so much that when they step aside and make a small error, which entails a loss, the suffering of that loss to them is so great. It's not even that Hashem punishes them. It's their own inner suffering. It's automatic. If I've lost something incredibly valuable, I suffer more than if it's not incredibly valuable. And value is subjective. So if the ordinary one, if us ordinary people lose a little bit of our olam haba, we've done something wrong, we've lost a bit of olam haba, okay, we carry on life as normal. We turn the TV on and we carry on watching the TV. It's not the end of the world. But if we're spiritual people, if we live in that mode, and we're close to Hashem, and now we've done something which has damaged our neshama, just a tiny little chink on the neshama, that's terrible. We've got a beautiful piece of dishware, of tableware, and it's an expensive piece of Rosenthal crockery, and you chip a little bit on the outside, you get very upset. If it's just something that you picked up at here at one of the local stores, and you chip it, you replace it, not the end of the world. It depends what value you put on loss, or the value you put on gain is the value that you'll experience, the suffering that you'll experience with loss. And Rav Dessler writes to his son. Rav Dessler is Reb Nachum Zev's, Reb Nachum Volva's son-in-law. And Rav Dessler writes to his son and refers to the question that his father-in-law asked Reb Simcha Zissel when he was a little boy. He actually refers to this very event, and he writes this in 1936. In 1936, Rav Dessler was in London, and his son, I think, was still in Lomje, was still in Europe. And you can see what was already happening in 1936. And he questions, he says, surely Hashem's going to be kind to us, surely we can relax, it's not going to be that bad. And he uses this to explain, no, it could be bad, because the Rebbeinu Shem is makpid on us. And we're living through these difficult times, and we've got to balance all sorts of difficult emotions that we're having at this time, all sorts of difficult emotions. But one of the things we've got to understand that we're suffering the loss. And I've spoken many times of the fact that there was miracle in October the 7th. And as we're learning more and more about how powerful Hamas is beyond our imagination, we're realizing what a miracle it was that they acted too early, so to say, on October the 7th, and we were able to gain. Imagine if they'd unleashed the full power of what they've prepared on us. How terrible that would be. So there have been enormous miracles every day of this war. There have been enormous miracles, but there's also been terrible loss, and we have to understand that וסביביו נשערה מאוד. This is Eretz Yisrael, and the Rebbeinu Shalom is much more meticulous about Eretz Yisrael than he is about any other country. And just as he's more meticulous with his tzaddikim than he is about ordinary people, he's more meticulous about Eretz Yisrael than about any other country. And what we were doing to ourselves before October the 7th was something that Rebbeinu Shalom had to put a stop to, and he had to put a stop to it even with suffering. If we value Eretz Yisrael as we do, Joey, you were just saying your nephew has been wounded, wants to get back into battle, he wants to do his job, he doesn't want to be held back. There's such commitment to do what we need to do because we value it, it's so valuable to us. We also need to know that Chas v'Sholom, when there's loss, whether it's loss of a single soldier, or whether it's loss of a whole lot of people as happened on October the 7th, it pains us terribly. It pains us terribly because every life is so valuable to us. That equation between the value of gain and the cost of loss is at the core of why we're suffering so much, or why it's so hurtful and so painful, and what it is that the Rebbeinu Shalom wants us to be Mesaki, and what Hashem wants us to correct and to make sure. People are talking about the day after. What's the plan for the day after? I'm not worried about what's the plan for Gaza the day after. I'm worried what's the plan for us the day after. Are we going to go back to the nonsense of before, or are we going to actually live a different kind of a life and demand of ourselves different values that are required? That's the וסביביו נשערה מאוד. The Rebbeinu Shalom is meticulous in how he responds to our negative behavior to make sure that we get the message and we correct our behavior and we correct that which is wrong so that we can go forward into a period of great happiness, great joy, and great geula.